All right, so the impact of timing in retirement. When are you going to retire? For me personally, what I did, I kind of went by a couple things. One was work. We had a major turnaround coming up in 2024, which is like a 30-day, you don't sleep, you live at the plant, and it's really hard on you. I'm not going to lie. It was very hard on me. And we would do these big turnarounds once about every 5 years. So that was one thing. The other thing was simply, it was an election year. It was 2024, and we had the big election coming up. And traditionally, from what I read and what I've observed through my lifetime, is an election year, the stock market generally treats pretty favorably. And again, in 2024, I did pretty well, so that ended up working out not too bad. Now, for most of us, the number one is going to be your financial readiness. And from what a Charles Schwab survey found, is that most Americans believe they need about $1.8 million to retire comfortably. Now, Fidelity, what they recommend, Fidelity recommends, is 10 times your pre-retirement salary. And you know, those are both pretty high bars, and you may or may not need to have that much to go ahead and retire. But you really don't know until you sit down and customize a plan and get it right for you. Me personally, mine was a little more complex because I wanted to retire at 61. So I had 4 years that I had to, pay for this high dollar health insurance that I got, almost $1,900 a month. So, I've got to draw a little bit more out of my nest egg for the first 5 years until I get to be 65 and get on Medicare than I would have originally. Okay, so number 2 on my list is that age matters. And what do I mean by age matters? Well, there's different groups of ages. At 55, there are some traditional employer plans that will let you start drawing money out, but it may not be penalty free. So 59 and a half is kind of the age where you can say you're going to be able to draw your money out penalty free from any traditional savings that you have. Like a 401k or a Roth or something like that. So 59 and a half is most of us, that's our target date for the earliest so we can retire. Now, when you do retire at 59 and a half, you're not eligible for Social Security. You become eligible for Social Security at 62 for reduced benefits. Yeah, reduced benefits. You don't get it all, but you can, if you need to, retire at 62. Now, you're also, as I mentioned earlier, you can't get Medicare yet. And that's a big cost when you talk about your health insurance. So 65 is where you can get Medicare. So 65 is the date that I'm kind of waiting for because I may also take my Social Security at 65. And at 65, it'll still be reduced a little bit because 67 is my full retirement age when I can get the full amount of my Social Security is at 67. Now, another benchmark, if you want to wait, you can get extra money on top of your Social Security, not on top of it, but your Social Security will continue to grow until you're 70 years old. Now, at 70 is where you can get the maximum benefit from your Social Security. And anywhere between 62 and 70, you're going to have reduced benefits. Starting at 62 is pretty reduced, and then at 70 is where you can get the maximum amount from your Social Security. So age matters. Remember those different ages, which start at 55 and they end up at around 70. And just as a bonus tip, at 73 to 75 is where RMDs kick in, or required minimum distributions. And that's where you have to take a certain amount out of your tax-deferred savings from your 401k and other tax-deferred savings plans like that. Okay, so I'd like to ask you, if you would, go down into the comments and leave me a comment. Let me know where you're from. I would love to know where you're from and where these videos are reaching out to. That'd be great. And also, I want to remind you, I'm not a professional financial advisor. So if you need professional advice, financial advice, or retirement advice, seek out a fiduciary fee-only financial advisor. So number 3, and this isn't in a particular order, is your healthcare insurance. So the timing of being able to, continue to insure yourself. Myself, I'm having to go out. I've got a retirement plan through my company. It's not really great. Like I said, it's around $1,900 a month, but it is reduced from what I could go out and get it on the open market, which for the same insurance would be about $2,500 a month. So health insurance is pretty crazy. So for a lot of people, they can't retire until they get to be 65 and they can go on Medicare. And you need to remember that Medicare is not free. Medicare is not free. You do have to pay for part or, a good portion of your Medicare, but it's much less than private insurance. Now, unfortunately, about 45% of Americans are having to retire before they want to because of health reasons. So, like I've said in multiple videos, when you're building your retirement plan, even if you really like your job and you plan on working till you're 67 or 70, you should try to plan to retire around 59 and a half or 62 and build your retirement plan there, because so many Americans are falling short of actually being capable of working till 67 or 70, that you need to be ready. If your plan is ready and you have the money allocated at 62 and you want to continue to work, that's great. Go ahead and continue to work. Maybe stop saving at that point and go ahead and start taking more vacations. Hopefully you got a lot of vacation time. But anyway, health and Medicare can be part of your timing strategy for retirement. All right, so number 4, what I just kind of mentioned was, try to plan to retire a little bit earlier, but Transamerican survey found that 56% of the people who are working longer than they actually expected to are doing so basically because they want to. They enjoy their work. They like the social activity, they like having a purpose in their life, and they just want to continue to work, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's also the bridge retirement, where people are retiring from their 9-to-5 job, which is very stressful, and they're going into a more flexible profession or career and working part-time. And that is a great strategy to go into retirement with. All right, number 5 is to retire with a clear vision in mind. In other words, you may be working so hard while you're working that you haven't figured out what you want to do when you retire. It's great to think, I'm going to throw that alarm clock away and I'm not going to worry about it anymore. But what are you going to do with your day? There's so many people that retire that are struggling with having purpose in their life, and they're getting bored. They're getting really bored in retirement. So have vision and make sure that when you do retire, the reason this is part of timing is that you may want to go ahead and check out some things before you retire to see what you want to do. Like me personally, I like to do a lot of fishing, and so I wanted to make sure I got a boat. It's not a great boat, just a little fishing boat, but I got it all paid off. I got my shop paid off, and I was set up to play golf and fish and do some traveling in retirement. So that's why I put it in the timing category, is it may take a year or two to figure out what you want to do in retirement. How do you want to spend your time? And what do you need to get before you retire so that you can do that? And number 6 is kind of tough because it's looking at the market and economic things before you retire and, kind of trying to look into a crystal ball. None of us can predict the market. We know we can't do that. If you're heavy into real estate, trying to predict, whether it's a buyer or a seller's market is really hard to do also. So, but you can just try to do the best you can. What you don't want to do, you don't want to retire right in the middle of a big downturn, because the sequence of returns risk is probably going to hurt you in those first few years if you don't pay attention to it. If you retire and your nest egg is way, way, way down, you're going to be drawing money from that nest egg while it's down instead of, letting it build up and buying. You know what they say, when the market's down, go ahead and buy. And again, I'm not a professional, but I do know enough that you got to be greedy when the market's down. And that's not the time you want to be pulling a bunch out. Also, the sequence of return risk, one reason that it's pretty big is that those first few years you're trying to travel, you're spending quite a bit of your nest egg in retirement, or hopefully you are, getting some enjoyment and squeezing everything you can out of your money those first few years in retirement. So I hope this video's helped you, and if it has, reach down and hit that like button and watch this video next.